So let's begin with our opening meditation. So let's find our comfortable position and posture. Always beginning with the stillness in the body. So coming to the body as our first doorway to becoming present, coming in this present moment. So we can gently close our eyes and we can feel the body sitting here right now, feeling the stillness that's in the body and that presence. And let's all adjust our posture. So the most important thing is that we have the support in our spine. So let's straighten our spine. If we're sitting on a chair, you don't lean back on the chair. We lean forward so that the spine is straight. And you can also tuck the chin just slightly so that that is also straightening the back of the neck. Very slightly, we just tuck the chin just a little bit down. And so when we're closing our eyes, we can feel that that's where our support is coming from, in the spine. Feel that strength and that straightness in the spine. And then we soften to feel the whole body, to relax our arms at our sides, whether we have our palms up and together at our lap, on our lap, or we can have our palms down and just let the arms hang naturally. So just for a moment, settle into the stillness of the body, resting and relaxing here in this posture. Feel the energy and the presence in the body and any tightness that may be here. And with that awareness, come to feel where you feel the breath most. Waiting for the breath to come in and out in its own natural rhythm. And even if the breath is short, that's okay. If it feels tight today, that's okay. We're going to start to create the warm environment that mindfulness is by bringing our attention to the space in our heart. Feeling if there's any contraction or tension in the heart right now. We can use the word yes. So whatever is here right now, we're starting to welcome and open to allow it in the space in the heart. And we can bring to mind the image of a clear, empty sky. An open, beautiful blue skies, and that quality of spaciousness to allow everything space to be as it is, with warmth. We can place our hands on our heart if we particularly don't feel very open today. And that sends a message to the nervous system to be calm, and that we can just rest back here and allow everything as it is. Let go of any plans. Let go of what happened today. And just come here to feel the space in the heart and rest in it. We can bring a gentle inner smile to the face as we imagine a sphere of white or clear light as if the sun can shine brightly in this clear open space and we can feel its warmth. Feel that warmth, and we can say thank you inside to know that that presence, that warm presence always being here, and that thank you also opening up our heart space to receive and become receptive to this warmth and to allow that to touch anything in the space that is here right now that we may have been resisting or pushing away. And we can think about our intentions, our motivation for practice is which we covered last week. We have to include that now. So we'll talk more about developing your own personal phrase or way to generate motivation and why you're doing the practice. So such as, may this serve to open my heart and mind and benefit all living beings by doing this practice. May I develop a warm heart and warm thoughts and warm feelings. And may this also benefit all beings. And think about our qualities or attitudes for our practice. Whatever is here, we're treating it and looking at it as fresh and new, without any labels, our beginner's mind, whatever we experience inside of us right now. We're not striving to change it or do anything. We're not judging, and if judgment is there, we're not judging judgment. We're just aware, and we're coming back to feel our experience fully and allow what is here. Acceptance, trust in our inner goodness and this warm and spaciousness. In this healing presence. Patience, not having any time expectation. If there's things that are arising in us, they can come and we can continue to turn our attention and allow it to be as long as it keeps presenting. No time to get rid of it or anything like that. This is developing our heart. It's true kindness and letting go. So just letting these things be. So we can imagine that warm light, and we're going to take 3 long deep breaths. As we breathe deeply in, any tension we feel in our body, we're going to let that slowly be released with our breath on the out breath. Feeling it melting and dissolving in the space around us. Another deep breath in. Feeling the tension anywhere in the body, particularly the heart. And as you exhale, feel yourself saying yes and letting go into this beautiful, warm spaciousness. The whole body, letting it go. And one last deep breath with your nice straight spine, but your relaxed muscles breathing in. Relaxing all the way down into the tummy and the legs and the feet and the arms, and feeling as you exhale your whole body as a field of energy and sensations. And just as you're relaxing here, softening your whole body, just find the breath again. And we let the breath be in the front of our awareness as it keeps us present in the body and softens so that we're not resisting any experiences or sensations or feelings that may be here, keeping soft openness and warmth. We can slowly start to bring our attention back with our breath into the room, to the sounds in the room, adjusting our eyes to the light in the room. It's like we're just sitting here in the sun. We're going to listen to the slides like we're sunbathing. Let that keep touching the tender parts and the tense parts, and just follow along with the slides, bringing your mind back if it gets lost. So we're going to be discussing for our last week all the key important points of mindfulness, hopefully so we can have a real solid understanding of the principles and the practices and be able to go away well informed and develop our own personal practice and training of the mind. If this is the path that we choose, this is what we choose we want to do. So we have some key elements of practicing mindfulness that I think are important is having that solid understanding of what the principles of mindfulness is. So that's the theory and what we were studying about the history and so forth. Then all the meditation practices that are outlined in the 4 foundations. Stabilizing and training the mind, which is the attention and concentration part, which is very, very important key element to be able to actually practice mindfulness. And understanding that a consistent motivation for our practice and the dedication and how important that is to training the mind also, and to awaken compassion. So dedicating all the benefits that we receive for doing what we're doing to develop and awaken compassion, which benefits ourselves and all beings and makes us happy. So that's a key to happiness and the causes and conditions of happiness. And creating the protective environment is very, very important. So understanding those qualities and bringing the warmth and heart to our practices is very important. Not just sitting down in a autopilot mode. We're always generating that warmth. So let's talk about the first element a little bit more. When we're understanding mindfulness principles and the practices, it's a gradual progression of understanding from study, from learning. Hopefully I've given you a lot of information, probably maybe too much at this point, but we could always go back and like myself, I'm always studying and learning as well as practicing mindfulness. And the daily formal meditation practices, we really need to understand how to do those. They're quite simple, but we still need to know what we're doing. And those are outlined in the 4 foundations, which is the breath and body, sensations, mindfulness of those, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind and thoughts, and objects or phenomena in the mind. So I tend to think of this part as building in our mind the framework and structures that support mindfulness and how we train the mind in being fully present. This includes the attitudes and qualities, and the more we do the daily practices, the more the mind becomes more stable and consistent and holds our experiences in this framework and structure that we're building. As wisdom, love, and compassion grows, our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors become less and less driven by survival and desire. And 2, stabilizing and training the mind. So after consistent and regular meditation practices, the mind will stabilize and wander away much less, and we feel more calm more often. Studies find that after an 8-week course, the amygdala seems to shrink. We talked about the amygdala. And the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with concentration and attention, appears to get thicker. So in other words, the part of our brain that regulates attention and concentration gets stronger, and those pathways become available and more accessible to regulate the limbic and the amygdala part of the brain. So they're the areas of the brain that are associated with concentration, but they help with stress reactions and regulation. So mindfulness practice builds a more integrated brain that helps regulate emotions and more skillful responses faced with potentially stressful situations. Before our reactions, what we talked about with the brain is it's a very short period when we have a feeling or trigger or reaction to something where we can actually, before we go into that behavior or that habitual reaction and response, all the stress chemicals go flooding through our body, and we don't really have a chance to, we have to kind of go through that wave and then come back and say, well, I would have rather done this. So we don't really have those opportunities if we're not developing that part of the brain, because it happens so quickly that we just go unconscious and we go back to our patterns of behavior. When we do our mindfulness practices, we're strengthening that mind to have that ability to go and assess, oh, is this a real danger? No, it's just a memory. It's just a trigger. It's not really a danger. And that allows to send the chemical messages down and soothe the limbic and the amygdala. So 3 is developing motivation and dedication. Interesting pictures I put up here. So another key element of mindfulness is always remembering to generate the right motivation and reason for doing the practices. From a Buddhist perspective, they often start and end their daily practices with a dedication prayer. The basic idea is that our daily practices, which develop the heart qualities, also generate beneficial merit for us. Some people call that karma. So instead of keeping the merit to benefit oneself and to free just oneself from suffering, they dedicate the merits received daily to work towards freeing your loved ones and all living beings as well, and freeing from suffering. So compassion is universal in this context, the compassion that we're developing. So it extends towards all living beings, and as Buddha said in the discourse of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, as this is the direct path to liberation from suffering and to self-realization. Some people refer to awakening our hearts as awakening our true nature, and can be said as our true nature being the inner Christ or Buddha or Krishna or any of the religious representatives or leaders, and having that same like nature as them that exists within our own hearts. And those are the leaders of the path before us of compassion and love and responding to suffering. So we have to develop our own dedication prayer so that before we get up during the day, we can say that to organize our minds so that whenever things arise that we're always using that as part of our practice to develop these qualities, and that everything that arises is an opportunity and becomes the object or the means from where we respond mindfully. So there's many here. I'm going to give you a few that you may want to adopt, or you can actually create your own dedication prayer. But here's a few. So before the day or before you start your practice, putting your hand on your heart, or whichever way you choose to do it. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. This is a simple quote from Buddha. If you're Catholic or Christian, you could say, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Continue to open my heart and my mind to suffering. May this practice I'm doing open my heart and mind and serve to alleviate suffering in myself and all living beings. Or may I develop a warm heart, warm thoughts, and warm feelings that benefit and free all living beings, including myself, from suffering and its causes. It's very specific. And may all that I experience today serve to awaken and open this heart and mind and be of benefit and help for all living beings. May all my thoughts, words, and actions contribute in some way to the happiness of all beings. So those are just a few. I can send you that by email. I'll be sending some materials at the over to you, and so I'll send that over. So you don't have to write it down, but you could also come up with something on your own. And another key element is creating the environment. So bringing the heart to our practices, generating the mindful attitudes, and so forth. After the mind is trained and can sustain attention and concentration, we need to be able to do that first. We can move on to the next step of training. And that's creating the protective environment. And this is done in our formal practices. Remember, I described it as our formal practices are like the greenhouse environment. Just one moment. We're getting feedback. I'm just going to... Okay, so it's creating, in our formal practices, this is when we're actually nurturing the tender seeds of these qualities, not when we're reacting over, out in our day-to-day experiences. We're doing this in a very protective environment by practicing mindfulness meditation. So these shoots, these tender shoots of these qualities strengthen and get nurtured during the practices. And so this is done through the application of the 7 key attitudes is what we start with. And these qualities create a protective environment that encourage, awaken, and nurture the heart, and very, very important part of the practice. So mindfulness or awareness is described to have 2 wings. So although we have attention and concentration, so we're aware of something, how we hold something in this awareness, which mindfulness is, it's a particular awareness or a particular way of paying attention to something that arises, also has the element of compassion. So some say the 2 wings of a bird. One wing is clear seeing or insight, which is mindfulness, and compassion. And this is in terms of how we meet suffering and hold our experiences in our mindfulness practices. So let's talk about clear seeing. We talked about mindfulness meditation. The Pali word for that was vipassana, and so we said that's translated as clear seeing or insight. So if you ever do any research or you're looking on YouTube for mindfulness guided meditations, you can also look under vipassana or insight meditation. So this clear seeing, this quality of clear seeing something without judgment and all the conditions of wanting and not wanting something. We're just looking at something and we're practicing to just see it freshly. It's developed. This clear seeing is developed by staying with body sensations and bringing the mind back, or staying with thoughts and feelings, and having an attitude of openness and acceptance to these experiences. And then what happens is we get deeper insight. And this deeper insight is about our life and our inner life and the unconscious, like what is behind these experiences, what's driving them. It gives us insight about our behaviors that we don't like, or so forth, the thoughts that we disturb us or we cause us suffering, and so forth, the way we create suffering for ourselves and for others, not needing to or not meaning to. But seeing what's really happening behind all that without the judgment. We can't change it if we just judge it. So the second wing is compassion. So although we have clear insight to see something, we also hold it as in a certain quality or attitude that we talked about to develop this wing of compassion. So we develop acceptance and generating that warmth and spaciousness in our hearts to allow what is happening, and with the motivation to respond and alleviate it. And this is a gradual process, obviously. There's a lot of things that the mind is wired to avoid and take us away from having to feel. So it's a gradual process of opening. Understanding compassion. This is very important. A lot of misunderstandings about compassion. So its connection here, I have a little picture on the right. Compassion connected to empathy and sympathy. Some definitions of compassion include basic kindness with deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and other living beings, coupled with the wish and effort to alleviate it. So basic kindness with deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and other living beings, coupled with the wish and effort to alleviate it. So suffering is very key to developing compassion. For compassion to arise and awaken in us, suffering is a key element. The wish that all sentient beings may be free from suffering is a simple way of what compassion is, said by the Dalai Lama. It's a 3-part process, people say. So I feel this suffering, so the effects of suffering. I understand this suffering of suffering. I understand this suffering, so cognitive understanding. And 3, I want to help either myself or others be free from this suffering, which is your motivational aspect. Compassion is not just feeling with someone, but seeking to change the situation. Frequently, people think compassion and love are merely sentimental, and no, they are very demanding. If you are going to be compassionate, be prepared for action. So that's from Desmond Tutu, who said that. I quoted him. There's a great teacher, if you want to look into her, who she took mindfulness and her understanding of mindfulness and all of her training from her teachers and developed a very specific training of mindfulness called self-compassion. She's called Dr. Kristen Neff, and I will send this information by email over to you as well. These are going to be the teachers that I think are the great leaders of teaching mindfulness that's current to our time, that's non-religious, so it does not necessarily in the Buddhist sense. It's understanding mindfulness from a more Western perspective and the suffering that is more relevant in the West. So one of the things in the West when the teachers had come from the East, is noticing that we suffer from a lot of criticism and judgment. Our conditioning in the West is different, and we're very harsh and driven and disciplined, but in a harsh way towards ourselves. So she's taken mindfulness and she's really put the light on the self-compassion development aspect. So she describes self-compassion having 3 elements: self-kindness, sense of common humanity. So self-kindness, she says, is understanding that we're not punishing. So to discipline ourselves in mindfulness is not punishment. And sense of common humanity. So another element of self-compassion is understanding that you can turn to your own suffering when you kind of know that this is a condition that all humans have. So knowing that you're not alone, everybody goes through this, gives us the courage to turn towards and have compassion towards our suffering. And mindfulness is neither ignoring nor exaggerating feelings of failure or criticism and things like that. Compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. And Jack Kornfield, he's another important teacher or leader in the West, Jack Kornfield. He says, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So self-compassion, for the Buddhist definition of compassion, it includes oneself as well as others. So the Dalai Lama talked about this, and I took some quotes from him. He was saying, for someone to develop genuine compassion towards others, we must have a basis upon which to cultivate our compassion. This is done in our practices. And that basis is the ability to connect to one's own feelings and to respond and care for one's own welfare. Caring especially towards those parts we normally don't like or reject. Especially. So therefore, we need balanced, mindful awareness of our internal experiences and world and an attitude of self-kindness towards it. And this allows us to sustain compassion towards others. In Buddhist tradition, loving kindness practices are taught before compassion practices are taught. And that is because they say compassion, that petal of the heart, inner quality, is more challenging to develop, and it requires other things, as part of the environment to awaken it. It can be rather difficult to help our hearts open in the face of suffering, especially when we face our suffering and we have blame towards others for those who deeply harmed us, and we have shame and we have anger and all of that. So to be able to respond to that as well. So loving kindness practices help us generate love and kindness. This creates the environment for compassion to develop and for others to have the same compassion for others. Because once we start to have that love and compassion towards ourselves and feel good about it, we naturally start to want that for others because we found it. We basically discovered it within ourselves. So what is empathy? Very different than compassion, but it's a part of it. So having an emotional response is empathy, similar to the response another is having. They call this mirror neurons. We all have it. So if somebody has a certain facial expression of anger, and without mindfulness, it can actually generate and activate those neural pathways or those circuitries in the brain and release the same emotion. So we can actually, that's why people who get angry and are angry and say something to us, quickly we can have the same like response and feel the same energy instantly without mindfulness. This is part of being a human being. They call it mirror neurons. It's wonderful, but you have to understand how to use it correctly. And so it goes beyond, empathy goes beyond a cognitive recognition that somebody is having an emotional feeling or so forth, and it includes a felt sense of what another person is experiencing. In the brain, we'll describe that, what I was saying, as it activates neural circuitry. So it's activating our limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, and it mirrors what the other person is experiencing through generating the same feelings and release of stress hormones rushing through the body. So there goes our mirroring their behaviors right back. That's why we can have those arguments and they just keep going and going and they're endless without mindfulness. So hence, also empathy, there could be empathy burnout. So those people, or how suffering can be passed on, we can call it empathy burnout. Empathy burnout means, let's just say you work in the health profession and you're exposed to suffering all the time. Well, that's activating that suffering within yourself. So you can actually have empathy burnout. It's an overload of those painful feelings and chemicals, stress chemicals. So we can be empathic with just about any emotion. That means joy, excitement, grief, boredom. So compassion is a special form of empathy insofar as it is empathy with suffering along with the wish to alleviate it. Suffering is a prerequisite for generating compassion and awakening it in our hearts and minds. So no mud, no lotus is explained in more detail here. What is sympathy? Sympathy is the emotional reaction and cognition of another's emotional state, but involves deep feelings of concern and sorrow for the other person. Sympathy includes the reactive element based on prior personal experiences. So whereas empathy is a mirror of another person's emotional and mental state, there is said to be more mindful awareness in empathy than there is in sympathy. So empathy, I feel your pain. Sympathy, I'm sorry that you're in pain. Is a way of simplifying that, the differences. Compassion or empathy. So compassion builds on empathy. Empathy without compassion may lead to burnout. Sympathy is more pity, Sylvia. Sorry, there's just a question being typed. So sympathy is more pity than empathy. Based on, yeah, so sympathy is more pity for that person, but based on your previous prior experiences, feeling sorry for them. So from your own painful experiences, you can have sympathy. And sympathy is considered to be less of a mindful state. Where did I put that? And it's said to be, so there is said to be more mindful awareness in empathy than there is sympathy. So the reason that is, from what my understanding of it, is sympathy is, by doing our mindfulness practices, we're processing unconscious, suppressed, unprocessed feelings that are driving our behaviors and causing us to react, and we don't resolve them. They just, causes and conditions just keep bringing them back up and triggering them over and over again. They're never actually transformed and resolved. So here's where sympathy takes place. So sympathy can be a trigger of our past experience, and we're not mindful of it, so it's an unconscious trigger that arouses in the brain the same feelings that produce feeling sorry for that person. And it's actually kind of a projection of our own pain onto that person. So we're putting more pain to that person instead of the mind being in a state where it's helpful and knows what could be helpful in the moment. It's more feeling, wow, pain, pain, pain. I know, I don't like this pain. This pain's terrible. And it's coming from your own past or, suppressed pain. Okay. So, oh, that's what you meant? Well, hopefully that's a little bit more explanatory anyways. So compassion or empathy, compassion builds on empathy. Empathy without compassion may lead to burnout. Understanding that is very important. Over-identification leads to burnout. So with the suffering, instead of having that balance of what is the antidote for suffering, what is the skillful response towards that suffering. Compassion is a teachable skill. Compassion, empathy, and kindness are interdependent. They work together, but they're somewhat distinct processes. Okay, so have you heard the word altruism?
Not
Talked a
me.
lot about in Buddhism being altruistic. It's something I really needed to get a grasp of. I didn't really understand it myself.
Never heard of that word before.
So people find altruism to be the way, when we develop it, what actually creates happiness. So although we're actively out there changing the causes of suffering and responding to suffering, it's the altruism part of it that allows us to still have peace of mind why we're doing that and be very happy. So it says here, I just have a few of these clips here. Okay, Sylvia, yeah, it's a tough one, altruism, but hopefully this will help you understand with that background of empathy, sympathy, and compassion. So altruism, let's call that the top of all of that. It's allowing, when we develop the compassion quality in us, for us to be a very functional, helpful person in society that is helping. And I guess most of our actions and our words and our thoughts are towards the alleviation of suffering, those things that we're engaged with in our daily activities. So I'll just read the clips here. People that perform altruistic acts not only help create a better society, but they're happier for it. Helping people whenever you can and don't expect anything in return is very important, understanding altruism. Or an altruistic person does not need the promise of going to heaven, to see the merit in good deeds. So think about that. Sometimes our conditioning is so deep that in order to be happy, we try to meet what we were told is good. So if I'm nice to people, then I feel good. If I am giving the poor money or doing anything along that line, then that's going to get me to get me to heaven, or I'm doing it because I have to be good because otherwise I'll be punished. It's kind of coming from fear and conditioning. It's not a natural, like I said, when we have love and kindness generated in us and we feel good and warm, we naturally want that for others, and it just becomes our natural focus of our minds and our actions and our speech. So it's a growing of happiness in us that extends out towards others, but without wanting anything in return, because we're not trying to get something by doing it. So that's altruism. I'll read here what I wrote. Altruism is a quality or element of compassion. Altruism can be considered either a motivation or an action that involves helping another without regard for personal gain. So just look at it that way. Empathy and sympathy may lead to altruism, but they don't necessarily do so. Compassion always includes altruism, but before compassion is developed, our motivation to develop it is under the influence of the drive system and motivated by outcomes. That's the way it starts. We have to understand that. So when we start doing our mindfulness practice, every time we generate our motivation and our dedication after we do our practices, may it benefit all living beings, we haven't developed that actual compassionate response, which is just that love and kindness pouring outwards towards others and seeing others as same as us and wants the same and deserves the same. It starts with training and effort and discipline. So that's actually starting from the drive systems. And it's motivated by a goal in the beginning or by an outcome. May I develop compassion? May I have these things? So goal-oriented approaches will eventually hit the wall and lead us to feelings of disappointment and frustration. That's why it's so important we emphasize that we're bringing warmth to our practice so that these tender shoots, the inner heart qualities, are being nurtured. And they're going to condition, instead of the drive systems or the survival instincts, our thoughts, our words, our actions. They will condition them and replace them with the wish not to have suffering, the threat, the defense mechanisms, the ways we get away from feeling pain. It'll naturally replace it by doing these practices. Altruism is the wisdom we develop. Altruism is the wisdom we develop to work for the benefit of others without expectations. The Dalai Lama said, when asked by Oprah, she asked him, what do you know for sure? And he said, well, that altruism is the best source of happiness there is, and no doubt about it. I believe altruism is the best source of happiness, even though we don't get it right away, but it's something that comes in our practice and develops over time as the heart opens. I believe it's the best source of happiness because we now are not self-oriented. So we're to feel less alone. We actually see our common, through suffering and understanding suffering, we generate care towards others and we see our connection to others. So we don't feel alone and we're not suffering alone in our own suffering. We see it as a combined, a connection to other people. Okay, one thing that's driving us is a desire for love. We have to really sit down and think about all our actions and all the things that we do is really coming from this place of wanting love. But there's ignorance towards that desire for love. We have to understand that that's ignorance of our true nature. So we can say that desire for love is real because it hurts and we have a longing that we can't satisfy. It's like an empty hole in our hearts. It's real, but it's based on ignorance, so it's not true. So every time I respond to suffering, this is a teacher actually taught this, is you could also, in order to help you have the courage to be with the suffering, you say, this is real, this is a real genuine feeling I'm having, but not true. So it's coming and being generated from something that's false, a false perception. One form of suffering is the desire for love. This causes us to be blind to the love inside of us. So we don't settle, sit back, and actually in our practice we're training to settle and relax and sit back and open so that we can actually touch and feel the loving presence within us. But when we have desire, the mind is in the mud. So it's struggling. I want. I need to get away. And what happens is that mud just keeps blocking our feeling of the love inside. Also, our defenses block it. Defending ourselves against a feeling blocks the ability to feel love. So this desire for love causes us to be blind, and causes us to feel separated from love, and it causes us to feel separated from our loved ones. This is a very important understanding how our brains, such as the reward system, the part which is constantly seeking pleasure, can be driving desire and ignorance, the cause of suffering. This is we get temporary pleasure from behaviors. This is our reward system. We talked about that. We get temporary pleasure from behaviors that give us rewards from others or from objects such as drugs or food or sex or gambling, that produce a rush of pleasurable chemicals. And what does that do? That just reinforces the desire. So this reinforces our behaviors and drives and arouses desire and cravings for objects. Support, and this also includes cravings for others to give us attention and affection and all that stuff, and constantly have to be reassured. So what we describe in relationships, when one is clingy, that can actually make people feel repelled and want to get away from us. So support and kind actions from our healthy relationships with others definitely help us to open our hearts. So we do need each other to discover love inside. However, remember this. This helps dispel the ignorance. It's when our hearts are open is when we actually feel love. And that love is coming from inside of us, not from an object. It is the conditioning running in the back that closes our hearts so we feel that it's void, it's no longer there. The conditioning that causes us to close our hearts, cutting us off. So this feeling is a real feeling if we feel pain or we feel desire or longing for love, but it's based on ignorance and not true. Rumi, I got a few poems here. Rumi said, "What you seek is seeking you." He's talking about his deep insights on his self-discovery of love. Rumi said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers." Rumi said, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." That's why we're softening our body, softening with the breath, and opening our hearts. Remember, the entrance to the sanctuary is inside of you. And he said, "You have within you more love than you could ever understand." So he really, really understood this in his awakening of his heart. So, okay, we are now finishing the foundations, and this is our last week, just going over the third and fourth foundation, but let's just review the first foundation, the body. These 4 foundations of mindfulness are the 4 groups of objects that we use and that are very valid to developing mindfulness or clear seeing as a bare understanding of things as they are. The body includes, we've done breathing, so we've done breathing in the body scan, but it includes any movements that we can also be mindful of: sitting, walking, postures, sensations in the body, pain in the body, our senses, all of our senses, our speech is part of the body, and some of the practices that get really deep for the Buddhist teachings is the contemplation of impermanence. So these objects really are the impermanent part of us. So it helps us when we see that they're coming and going, such as our body aging and decaying and death, and seeing how all things have an impermanent nature. We use the body to actually understand impermanence, which helps us discover what is really our true nature, and that we're not these impermanent things of our experience. The formal practices of mindfulness of body include mindfulness of breath, body sensations, body scan, active movements. Some people do mindful walking, eating, talking, standing, yoga. Contemplation of the body elements, composition of the body elements, the 4 elements. that the body's made of: water, air, earth, and fire. And we already talked about that. So Buddha taught his disciples to contemplate the body or as contemplating the body as or in the body. What does that mean? Very simply, it means to regard the body as an impermanent physical form with no self attached to it. Part of what I wanted you to be aware of is why we're emphasizing in our formal practice posture. Our body is a very sensitive tool to help us become mindful. For instance, these two postures here, those are the two postures that we talked about. So the guy on the left, he has his palms up, placed down on his lap. He has his chest open, and his spine straight and so forth. And this is actually really helpful in being awake and aware and attentive. If we slump, we start to get drowsy and our attention doesn't get very well. So having this body awareness influences our mind and our state of mind. Also, I put here in the middle, these are the chakras that run up and down the spine, but these are the energy centers, really. And the free flow, when we sit in that certain posture, everything is free flowing and connecting and speaking to each other and integrated. Here's another way when we sit on the chair. So having this girl on the right, she is having her palms down, sitting in her formal posture. But on the chair, we could do the same thing with the palms on our lap and up, or palms down, and not leaning on the back of the chair, giving that spine straight and her chin tightly tucked, chest open, and we get a real the expansion in our chest and belly of our breath, which gives us benefits. So these are the different postures that we can be, that mindfulness will help us become aware of. We get deeper and deeper with our connection to our body by being with our breath and developing that awareness. And so we're just looking at some of these postures that will affect our states of mind. Very, very quickly sends messages to the nervous system. So like look at sadness here in the middle and the bottom and the slumped postures of sadness. But if we say, okay, well sadness is here, or I feel a sensation of sadness, and we sit with our openness and our straight spine and our attention, then we still feel the sadness, but it doesn't take over our whole state of mind and our whole body. It's a holding of it in our warm spaciousness of our heart, but it's not taking over our whole being. These are all the different ways that we mirror. Like, look at these eye expressions. And, when I said when we meditate, sometimes we're trying and striving. So we can realize, oh, I'm striving because my mind, look at my eyes are straining when I'm sitting here. So that kind of softening by the body scan, we get used to that. And generating that little inner smile that comes more and more as the heart's getting warmer. And sends a message to the nervous system and activates that and generates those calm feelings. We always have, the hands are very important too, because it's about grasping and desire. So when we're in positions where we know that we've got a lot of tension in our hands and we kind of become mindful of that, that can create a very open state of mind as well. Just that, letting go in our hands, reflects in our minds. Yes, mind over matter, Sylvia. Mind influencing the physical body. Different postures and facial expressions arouse different emotional mind states and have physiological responses in our nervous system. For instance, the fight, flight, and freeze responses, the stress responses coming from the sympathetic division of our nervous system. So right now, before we train in mindfulness, the sympathetic nervous system is dominating. That's why we're a stressful society. The sympathetic system is responsible for blood pressure, heart rate, many conditions that we can stem to stress, rapid respiration. It causes pupils of the eye to expand and secretion of stress hormones. Okay, so right now, before we train in mindfulness and develop the warm and tender qualities, the drivers are the survival instincts are running and activating the stress systems. Okay, so second foundation of mindfulness is the feelings and sensations. We've done 2 weeks of this. That includes in the teachings is the pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant. So we've gone all over this. Our attitude, though, is the most important thing. Is I am going to be teaching for this week the third and the fourth foundation, but I'm still working just for you, so you know myself, is these are taught in a certain order so that our awareness is and the warm qualities are gradually including these other things. So in our awareness. So feelings and sensations are treated with the same attitude that we treat the breath and the sensations in the body. So feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky, but our conscious breath is, Thich Nhat Hanh said, conscious breath is my anchor. So we're always keeping the breath at the forefront. And if things uncomfortable things arise, then we pay attention and include that. But the breath and that calm presence is including with it the feelings. Feelings are just visitors. They arise, we let them come. We don't fight them, we don't struggle with them, we don't indulge in all the thoughts and things behind them and let them go. So with the second foundation of mindfulness, the gateway or investigation is feelings and this is the feeling tone of our experiences. The Buddha taught that all mental and physical experiences have a feeling tone. We can open to and investigate these as they arise and as they pass. You might be aware of unpleasant bodily sensations such as tension, contraction, or heat, for example. All can be experienced without grasping, resisting, or judging, and we can train to include any feelings with tenderness and warmth and give as much space to allow it. The breath and body remains as our anchors in the present and to calm and stabilize the mind. Third foundation, mindfulness of mind or mental states and processes. The mindfulness of mind formal practices include the relaxation of body and mind with the natural movement of the breath, but still also we include the different mental states that arise and the different processes. So this is the next foundation. We'll just talk about it, but again, we're still staying on, we're just beginners. We include any present moment experiences of thoughts and states of minds with the breath. We can investigate while paying attention when the mind wanders and the thoughts that we have about the future, the past, or current experiences, and the different states of mind that generates. So, of course, if we're having a memory of a past experience, it's going to generate certain states. Fear, feeling fearful, feeling agitated, sleepy, dull, bored. All of these are different states, but the feelings are behind them. Paying attention when our attention wanders, but also why and what may be behind the surface of the mind. Then we're looking, the third foundation gets really into depth more about the relationship of the feelings and the sensations with the different states of mind, such as worry. So worry would be thought as the activity at the tip of the iceberg of the mind. So we're having worry thoughts, and it's at the tip of our consciousness. We're aware of only the worry thoughts. But below we find fear, and the resistance to fear, and the tightness in our bodies buried underneath and below. A simple way to practice this is to note worry thoughts, and then ask, what am I feeling right now that's behind these thoughts? And can I open and create warm space for this right now? That's a simple way of practicing bringing yourselves back. Okay, this is just, I put this up here on the slide because I want you to understand a little bit about the fourth foundation of mindfulness, just so that we've covered them all. But it's it's the Dharma teachings, what they call, or the Buddhist teachings, and it's very in-depth teachings of the mind objects, and they've actually got them in 5 lists here that you could one day look into if you're interested more. So the 5 lists are the 5 hindrances of mindfulness, the 5 aggregates, the 6 internal and external sense bases. This is pretty in-depth. The 7 factors of enlightenment and the 4 noble truths. Here's a simple breakdown of the list. The 5 hindrances are sense, desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt. The 5 aggregates are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The 6 sense bases are eye and form, ear and sound, nose and odor, tongue and flavor, body and touch, mind and idea. The 7 factors of enlightenment are investigation, energy, joy, mindfulness, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And the 4 noble truths are suffering, the causes of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the noble eightfold path. So one of the simplest ways to understand the 4th foundation is seeing it as an investigation of whether the mental states that we are aware of are old habitual responses leading to suffering, or wholesome and leading to liberation and freedom from suffering. That's pretty much what we're looking at these states is, are we following them? It gives us a choice of whether to follow them or not. Mental objects are often a misrepresentation of reality and driven by threat, defense, or reward, our survival systems. This keeps us from being conscious, present, and connected to the higher brain of reason, logic, and the ability to respond wisely to suffering with our hearts. So the 4th foundation is really about practicing not engaging with these patterns, understanding what they are. This is actually a hindrance to our practice, and then deactivating the sympathetic stress responses by staying with our breath and remaining calm and not following it. That's pretty much what the 4th foundation is learning to really direct our minds based on these teachings and understanding of the brain. So through practice and repetition, mindfulness can be firmly established as a steady state of a parasympathetic leadership within the autonomic nervous system. It builds new pathways in the brain that regulate stress and emotions and therefore create optimal health and functioning to all the systems of the body, thus establishing a coherent intelligence amongst all the body systems of awareness and building a wired and more balanced, integrated, and compassionate brain. So that's the 4 foundations. So we could just gradually include, when we're doing our meditation, any emotions and any thoughts and states of mind, but just use coming back to the awareness of our body, softening our body, our posture, and our warmth, qualities of warmth. What's really here right now can I allow it to be? And keeping that as your regular training towards responding to when things arise. The mindfulness training is activating our parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the practice is what it's actually doing, so that system becomes dominant. Studies show that mindfulness training have great effects on the nervous system. It's why we feel calm after following our breath. This is because it's the parasympathetic is responsible for decrease in respiration rate, decrease in heart rate, and decrease in stress hormones. So, Chitta, when we talk about mindfulness of mind, the word used in mindfulness is the Pali word when it was taught in the 4 foundations called Chitta. So, Chitta means mind when we talk about mindfulness of mind. It's translated, though, as consciousness or mental states. It is also sometimes rendered heart-mind because it engages with emotions as well. Chitta as a mindset can, for instance, become contracted, become distracted, our minds, it can become composed or focused, and our minds can be dominated by certain emotions so as to be terrified, astonished, or tranquil. So mindfulness is about purification of the mind. Buddha said, since everything is a reflection of our minds, everything can be changed by our minds. A host of emotionally charged states can pertain to chitta or mental states. For a long time, this chitta, as a result of not training the mind and long-time conditioning, has been defiled by attachment or desire and ignorance or delusion. Attaining a purified mind corresponds to liberation from desire, which we've been talking about over and over and over, or the attaining of clear seeing and insight. A liberated state of mind reflects no ignorance about anything, all phenomena. It just sees things clearly. It sees things that are of desire nature. It sees things that are of defiled nature, or defilements. So, as these represent bondage, their absence is described in terms of freedom from suffering and desire. So this is what is meant in mindfulness as freeing the mind and how that comes about in our training. And a word very important in mindfulness training for Buddhism is called bodhicitta. So not just chitta, but bodhicitta. So that means the enlightened mind. That is your true nature. In Buddhism, the enlightened mind is a mind that strives toward awakening, empathy, and compassion for the benefit of all sentient beings. They could say it's bodhicitta is why we have a body, why we are born here. That all things are of this pure nature. This pure, open, clear nature. Diamond-like nature, they call it, is our pure mind. And so, bodhi is Sanskrit or a Pali word for enlightenment. So, bodhi is enlightenment, and chitta means mind. It refers to the wish to attain enlightenment, self-realization for the benefit of all sentient beings. A bodhisattva is a being or a sattva with the bodhicitta motivation. So you could say, if we become a practitioner of mindfulness, we're bodhisattvas awakening, or awakening bodhisattvas. Or you could even look at it as awakening your Christ-like nature and so forth. So no one can save us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. Buddha was asked, what have you gained from meditation? His followers asked him. He replied, nothing. However, Buddha said, let me tell you what I lost. Anger, anxiety, depression, insecurity, fear of old age, and fear of death. We're almost done here. Please hang in with me, guys. So sorry, it's been a lot. I wanted to really add here to honor a family member as well, that what we're doing here can be very helpful for things that cause suffering in our family, or any kind of disorders and conditions that we may have inherited in our families. That mindfulness is a very, very recognized form of treatment for disorders in the brain. So mindfulness-based stress reduction clinics and practices seek to alleviate suffering. It's very encouraging to see research being done more and more on the effects of these practices, and research suggests that mindfulness-based treatments can be used to treat a large number of both physiological and psychological ailments, including chronic stress disorders, panic disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, emotional dysregulation, and many more. It says here, stressed mind leads to a limited life. So I just have some pictures here of somebody addicted to food and somebody very stressed and distraught here on the left before mindfulness training, and then a happy well-balanced individuals on the right. And specifically, I'm talking about prevention for depression and treatment for depression. So as previously mentioned, mindfulness training affects emotions through the amygdala and the regulation of stress hormones. It has been suggested that due to the secretion of serotonin found during mindfulness practices, helps improve mood. It's not surprising, as this is exactly the way that antidepressant drugs work, by increasing the availability of synaptic releases of serotonin in the brain. Furthermore, it has also been shown that the practice of meditation actually changes the way sadness is expressed and lowers our vulnerability to dysphoric feelings. Summarizing everything we covered about what really mindfulness is after all these 8 weeks together, is mindfulness training is training the mind to pay attention in a particular way that releases stress and suffering. A mental state. So mindfulness is a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, used as a therapeutic technique. Summary, also, we have to develop the muscle of concentration and intention, first and foremost, and the ability to keep our minds focused. Mindfulness makes what was previously unconscious and buried and driving our habits and states of mind and behaviors become conscious. So this iceberg here, the more we do our training, the more the tip of the iceberg becomes visible. Understanding mindfulness is very important to understanding our unconscious mind and the brain systems that stem from the survival instincts. And these are the hidden drivers and the causes and conditions of suffering and our harmful behaviors. Understanding suffering and the causes and conditions develops the desire to free oneself and others and make the effort to do so. Mindfulness is the training of the mind and path that one can actually take as the steps or the direct path to freedom from suffering. Mindfulness trains the mind to respond and open our hearts to suffering rather than react unconsciously in ways that are not helpful or skillful for oneself or others. Our daily practices are key to creating the protective environment for the development of the heart and strengthening the qualities that transform suffering and free the mind and make lasting changes. Compassion, love, wisdom, patience, etc. grows. It literally builds a new brain, a new integrated brain. It develops new neural pathways and patterns in the brain in the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is the part that maintains awareness. It's our human, more evolved brain. Up on the top, maintains awareness, rational and logical reasoning. It brings memories, emotional triggers, and reactions to one's awareness. It brings body awareness of stress responses. It trains the mind to assess if we're really in danger or not, before we flip our lids. It is the part of the brain that helps us respond more skillfully, so we can draw on reason and logic when suffering is around, or we're triggered, or memories arise, or pain arises, and helps us regulate emotions. It reduces stress, chemical release of stress hormones, and activates and strengthens the parasympathetic states in the nervous system. And finally, liberates consciousness in the mind from suffering and the causes, and develops our heart and awakens our true nature. The path to self-realization. We're finished. All that theory So I'm just going to leave it open since this is our last class together to discuss any questions about your daily practice. All I want you guys to do is keep in mind that training daily and regularly is the most important part. We started with 10 minutes a day, and I would recommend as you go out or as you continue to do this on your own if you choose to do so, that you try to aim towards at least 30 minutes a day over time. So getting to 30 minutes of practice a day. But you have to really assess this on your own. So you have to understand when you go beyond that point of generating the ability to maintain attention and concentration and the ability to be present and calm. When you start practicing and generating stress and irritation, then we stop. Okay? But we continue to do our practice, so 5 to 10 minutes, and if we can get to 30 minutes, that's all I'm sending you guys off with. 30 minutes as a goal. I'm going to be posting up on my YouTube channel all the different types of meditation practices so that you can record them, put them on your iPad or your computers or your iPod or anything, and be able to listen to the audio guided meditations. So I will put that up on my YouTube channel. I'm going to put together short practice, long practice, so you can record all of them and help you get used to doing them and guide you along the way. I'm going to send you some links of the teachers that you could listen. If you're still interested in studying this and going further, I'll send you links to the teachers that I recommend online. And so, you can continue your study and research on all these things that I talked about further. And always feel free to call me or email me for support. If you have any questions or anything, I'm always available for that. So I'm just going to leave it open to you guys now. If you have any questions about anything, go ahead if you have questions. Okay, Mom, do you believe a person can be born with altruism? Born with it?
For example, Mother Teresa.
Well, how I would answer that question is, as the Dalai Lama always says, these seeds of our true nature, our innate goodness, which is compassion, and altruism is a part of compassion, is something that has to be nurtured and developed. So we have the seed, we're all born with the seed, and even why we're here, some say is based on compassion. It's that in the part of us that is here to contribute to awakening humanity and born for a certain purpose, but that purpose is being revealed as our path, depending on which path we choose. So it's born in us, the seeds, because it's our true nature. So that seed is kind of hidden. So when we do our practices, we're getting in touch with that seed in the heart, and we're growing it. Some of us could be, yeah, and so that development of mind, remember we were talking about chitta?
Yeah.
That is the mind, that mind stream is what they call, is what gets reborn. So if you develop your mind in this lifetime, it actually affects the life experience of life and changes the causes and conditions for the next life. So that your development, you don't lose it. So this is a Buddhist kind of way of looking at it, is that stream of mind is what's being reborn. So
Thank you.
if you have a strong, developed, clear mind, then your karma is what they call it. So that means you've created the cause and conditions for a life of more service. So Mother Teresa definitely had done a lot of service.
Yes.
Yeah, and Sylvia says, I don't think you can become a saint overnight. Absolutely not.
Mm.
This is actually, the Dalai Lama has said even after 60 years or 70 years, I think it was age 16, he's supposed to be they keep an eye on his lifetimes because of the people following him. And he's considered the Buddha of compassion, the Dalai Lama. But he talks about very humbly that at age 16, he didn't take seriously trying to change these attitudes and these perceptions in his own mind until he was about 16, even though he was trained at a very young age as a monk, and said that even after the age of 80 or what he is, it's still not satisfactory for him.
Mm-hmm.
So even though his actions are very helpful, he's still developing his mind.
Heather, this has nothing to do with the class, but I want to ask a quick question. Do you know if the ETA, Electronic Travel Authority, is the same as a visiting visa?
I'll have to look that up in a second. I just
'Cause
want to stop the recording.
okay.
But did you guys want to just stop here, or did you want to do a little meditation to go, or stop here? Yes. Yeah. So we'll stop here. I'm just going to stop the recording.